First of all, thank you to Mr. Vivek Bhatia and to fellow members on the dais. I think really some thought-provoking stuff. And also thanks to the organizing team for the opportunity to be here and to all the delegates for taking time out for the session today. So I have just two simple points that I will try to make over the course of the next few minutes. One is, I think, for quite some time there's been a question around how important will renewables be to the overall power requirements of the power supply scenario going forward. And to me, it's not a question of if, but it is rather a question of when. In many, my view is it is rather inevitable that renewables will take a much, much more stronger role in meeting the power requirements going forward. That's one. The second point I would like to make is, there is also a perception that renewables continue to struggle in terms of competitiveness, and as already some of my fellow members on the dais have suggested, that is not the case. I would actually like to make that point even more strongly. So, what do we see on this graph? I think it's a simple representation of the energy consumption per capita on the y-axis versus the relative wealth in terms of GDP per capita, the relative well-being of different countries that exist. And the size of the bubble actually indicates the resource availability, energy resource availability on a per capita basis. So what's really interesting is that if you look at India and China, they're really on the left-hand side, which means that there's a long way to go. As all of you would be aware, to have a better and a more meaningful existence, the need for energy certainly goes up. So what happens as we move towards the right? You obviously need a lot more energy resources to support your growth. But if you look at the size of the bubbles, the question that I pose is, where are the resources? And that is really the challenge that we see. And that is really the opportunity whereby renewables will play a lot more in terms of our energy contribution and consumption going forward. Add to that the complexity of sustainability. I am sure all of you are no strangers to the fact that you can look at whatever projections over the course of the next 100 years, we will run out of whatever we believe as conventional resources of energy. In fact, for many of the more popular sources, cheaper oil, access to coal, all of those things, in fact, are projected to run out much sooner, actually by middle of the century. So we are actually looking at a scenario where energy requirements and demands are going to go up, as I showed in the previous slide, and in a parallel scenario where the availability of conventional fuels to support that growth is actually going down. And on top of that, we have the issue and the complexity of sustainability in terms of climate change issues, in terms of emissions, in terms of degradation of the ecological environment. So all of that, to me, really points towards the inevitability of what we are heading towards in terms of renewables. I'm sure also that all of you have had the opportunity to go through all these kinds of projections, and clearly the numbers point in that direction. You can pick up any study, and really the range going forward that is projected for global demand is somewhere between 50 to 40% of energy by 2030 is what we will see from renewables. And that is not a small number by any means. But my feeling is actually you will be more towards the right-hand side. You'll be more towards the right-hand side in terms of the outlook. That means we will see closer to 30% or so in terms of the contribution from renewables going forward. That, my friends, is something that is non-trivial. It is no longer the case that renewables will be a marginal play, but rather it will be one of the major plays in the energy story as it unfolds going forward. At the same time, we have a very interesting situation where we see almost a little over 1 billion people who are actually energy deprived, with no access to conventional electricity in the form that we all experience on a day-to-day basis. And to me, again, this highlights the case for renewables more powerfully than anything else. Because if we compare two things, one, the cost of getting a conventional grid and the efficiency of getting a conventional grid to address the power requirements of this deprived pool of people, you would see a situation where in India, for example, we continue to struggle with losses up to the extent of 20% on the grid. Even going forward, the outlook is that this will come down to maybe 17%, irrespective. If we stick with 20%, and we look at the current projections of TPP-driven power generation, we are looking at somewhere around 5.7 per unit. And if you compare that with what wind and solar can deliver over the next couple of years, you suddenly find that it is not a case that they are uncompetitive. Rather, wind and solar and renewables are more competitive, especially in an off-grid scenario where they can take out the grid losses associated with such complex solutions that we are want of creating. So, what do we make of it? At ThyssenKrupp, we call this the dynamics of more and better. More in the sense that there is a demand, there is a pool of people who are willing and seeking solutions, and on the other hand, we have better ways of servicing their requirements, and it's really a question of bringing both of those two things together. And all of that we are trying to reflect in the portfolio that we bring. But I will not bore you with that. I would just say thank you, and let us not miss the boat that renewables brings in terms of opportunities for us. Thank you.